The vomit was fluorescent blue, which honestly made the whole thing worse. Tess Corin watched her crystalline exoskeleton shimmer with reflected light from the puddle as she stepped carefully around it. 5 minutes into humanity's so-called standard military conditioning protocol, and already one of the galaxy's most decorated young officers was losing his lunch over the pristine floors of Terra Station's simulation lab. Pathetic, she muttered, her voice carrying the distinctive harmonic overtones of her species. The Valerians had conquered 3-star systems through pure tactical brilliance. Whatever crude psychological tricks these humans employed couldn't possibly be worse than the mental discipline required for crystalline matrix combat. Maybe we should reconsider this, Bex whispered, her gill slits fluttering with anxiety. The Nefri cadet's skin had shifted to a nervous shade of amber, her aquatic heritage making her particularly sensitive to stress pheromones. The hegemony representative already left, and Luna 7 keeps making those clicking sounds. Indeed, the android was processing something that seemed to be causing minor system conflicts. Her optical sensors flickered between blue and red as she stared at the paused simulation display, where a human soldier hung suspended in some kind of sensory deprivation tank. Recalibrating emotional parameters, Luna 7 announced flatly. Human training methodologies appear to violate 17 different galactic conventions on cognitive welfare. Quinn Vale, their human instructor, snorted from his position by the control console. The man looked like he'd been carved from granite in disappointment, with scars that told stories no one wanted to hear, and eyes that suggested he'd already buried most of his friends. "We haven't even started the fun part yet," he said, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that came from too many years in places where casual menace was a survival skill. "That was just the intake psychological evaluation. You know, where we figure out which buttons to push to break you." Tess felt her confidence waver for the first time in 3 rotations. "Break us." The Galactic Military Exchange Program described this as cultural familiarization. Or did? Quinn's smile was sharp enough to cut atmosphere. "You're about to get very familiar with why human soldiers have a 97% mission success rate in joint operations, while maintaining the lowest casualty figures in known military history." He tapped a series of commands into his console, and the simulation environment shifted around them. Gone was the sterile laboratory. Instead, they found themselves standing in what appeared to be a muddy trench, rain hammering down from a grey sky that seemed to leach hope from the air itself. "Welcome to week 1 of human basic training," Quinn announced. "The year is 2157, Earth calendar. You've just enlisted to defend your homeworld against the Proximan expansion. You're 18 years old, you've never been more than 50 kilometers from where you were born, and you have 16 weeks to learn how to kill efficiently, or watch everyone you love die screaming." The scenario began playing around them, and Tess immediately understood why her colleagues had struggled. The human recruits in the simulation weren't just learning combat techniques. They were being systematically stripped of every comfortable assumption about life, death, and their place in the universe. She watched a drill instructor reduce a young man to tears, not through physical abuse, but through a precisely calibrated psychological assault, designed to shatter his civilian identity and rebuild it as something harder, more resilient, and infinitely more dangerous. "This is barbaric," Bex whispered, her skin cycling through distressed color patterns. "We don't treat our warriors this way. We honor them, guide them, help them grow into their roles." "And how many wars have the Nefri won in the last century?" Quinn asked conversationally. "We don't believe in war anymore. The Galactic Council maintains peace through human soldiers," Quinn interrupted. "Funny how that works out." Jorik, the hegemony hybrid who'd been silent since his colleague fled the room, finally spoke up. His voice carried the artificial modulation of his cybernetic implants, but underneath it was something that might have been recognition. "You're not just training soldiers," he said slowly. "You're creating a specific type of consciousness, one that can function under conditions that would break most sentient minds. Now you're getting it." Quinn advanced the simulation, and they watched human recruits endure scenarios that would violate every known protocol for psychological safety. Sleep deprivation, sensory overload, constant stress, and through it all, a relentless message that their individual comfort, their personal desires, even their lives were secondary to the mission and their unit. Tess felt something shift in her crystalline matrix as she observed. The humans weren't being brutalized randomly. Every stress, every breaking point, Every moment of psychological pressure was carefully calibrated to forge something specific. They were watching the deliberate creation of minds that could endure the unendurable and continue functioning. Luna 7's optical sensors had stabilized into a steady red glow. "I am detecting severe cognitive dissonance in my evaluation protocols," she announced. "This training methodology simultaneously violates all known standards for psychological welfare, while producing measurably superior combat effectiveness." "Welcome to the human paradox," Quinn said. "We figured out a long time ago that nice guys finish dead. You want soldiers who can march through hell and still complete the mission. You have to show them hell first, then teach them to make friends with it." The simulation shifted again, and now they were watching advanced psychological conditioning. Human soldiers learning to compartmentalize trauma, to function through grief, to make impossible choices without hesitation. Tess watched one simulation where a human commander chose to sacrifice half his unit to save civilians, then continued leading the survivors as if nothing had happened. "How do they not break?" Bex whispered, her skin now a deep blue that indicated emotional distress among her species. "Some do," Quinn admitted. "That's what the psychological screening is for. We weed out the ones who can't handle it before we invest too much time in them, but the ones who make it through, well, you've seen the battlefield reports." Tess had indeed seen those reports. Human units performing impossible rescues, holding positions against overwhelming odds, completing missions that any rational analyses would classify as suicide runs. She'd always assumed it was some kind of species-wide death wish or cultural obsession with martyrdom. Now, she was beginning to understand it was something far more sophisticated and infinitely more unsettling. The psychological conditioning continues throughout their entire military career, Quinn continued, advancing through years of simulated training, pain tolerance, stress inoculation, trauma processing, decision-making under extreme duress. By the time they're deployed, human soldiers can function in conditions that would leave most species catatonic. The simulation showed them advanced scenarios now. Humans operating for weeks without sleep, making life-or-death decisions while wounded and exhausted, maintaining unit cohesion even after catastrophic losses. It was beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. Jorik suddenly staggered backward, his cybernetic implants sparking slightly. "I need to... I can't." He stumbled toward the exit, his artificial systems apparently overwhelmed by what they were processing. For down. Bex lasted another 10 minutes, until they reached the section on chemical warfare conditioning. The sight of human recruits learning to function while their nervous systems were being systematically attacked by various toxins finally sent her fleeing the room, her gills fluttering in distress. 3 left, then 2, as Luna 7 announced that her ethical subroutines were in critical conflict, and she needed to withdraw for emergency maintenance, which left just Tess and Quinn in the simulation chamber as the program reached its final phase. "Still think you can handle whatever humans dish out?" Quinn asked, his expression unreadable. Tess straightened her crystalline spine, even as she felt her exoskeleton trembling slightly from the stress responses she was experiencing. "Show me the rest." The final protocol was elegantly simple and absolutely terrifying. Tess found herself standing in a simulated command center, watching human officers make decisions that would determine the fate of millions. The scenario was based on real historical events, Quinn explained, from humanity's early expansion period, when they'd first encountered species that didn't share their peculiar approach to conflict resolution. "This is the Battle of Kepler Station," Quinn said quietly. The Centauri Coalition had taken out 3,000 human civilians, plus representatives from 15 different species including several hundred Valerian diplomats. Tess felt her crystalline matrix resonate with recognition. She knew this battle from her military history courses, but always from the strategic perspective. The human response had been studied in academies across the galaxy as a masterpiece of tactical innovation. The Coalition demanded complete human withdrawal from the Kepler system, Quinn continued. In exchange, they promised to release the hostages, unharmed. Standard diplomatic wisdom suggested negotiation, compromise, perhaps offering the Coalition mining rights or territorial concessions. The simulation showed the human command staff receiving the ultimatum. Tess watched their faces, expecting to see the kind of careful deliberation that characterized proper military decisions. Instead, she saw something that made her exoskeleton shimmer with unease. The humans weren't just angry. They were coldly, systematically furious in a way that seemed to transform them into something else entirely. They never even considered negotiating. Tess whispered, understanding flooding through her consciousness. Negotiate with Quinn's laugh was sharp and humorless. That would just encourage more hostage-taking. No, the humans did what humans do. They turned the situation into a teaching moment. The simulation played out the human response. Instead of negotiating, they'd surrounded the station with enough firepower to reduce it to constituent atoms, then broadcast a simple message to every listening post in 3-star systems. Release the hostages in the next 6 hours, or we demonstrate why taking human civilians hostage is considered a fatal mistake. The coalition called their bluff, Quinn explained. They didn't understand that humans don't bluff about things like this. Tess watched in fascination and horror as the human fleet began systematically destroying every coalition asset in the system. Not the station itself, not yet, but everything else. Ships, orbital platforms, mining installations, communication relays. The message was unmistakable. Surrender the hostages, or watch your entire infrastructure burn. The coalition still didn't surrender, Quinn said. They thought they understood the math. 3,000 hostages versus their strategic position in the system. Any rational species would eventually accept the loss and negotiate. But humans aren't rational, Tess said, the words tasting like truth and copper in her mouth. Oh, we're rational. We're just playing a longer game than everyone else. Quinn advanced the simulation to its climax. The humans made their final offer. Release the hostages, or the station dies. When the coalition refused, they kept their promise. The simulation showed the moment when Kepler Station simply ceased to exist. The human fleet had somehow managed to extract the hostages in the same microsecond that annihilated the station, using a combination of transporter technology and tactical precision. They remained classified to this day. 3,000 civilians saved. Every single hostage-taker eliminated. Zero compromise with terrorism, Quinn recited like a mantra. The lesson was received by every species in the galaxy. Taking human civilians hostage isn't just unsuccessful, it's a guaranteed death sentence. Tess found herself struggling to process what she was witnessing. The psychological conditioning isn't just about making better soldiers, it's about creating a species that other species are afraid to fight. Now you're thinking like a human. Quinn smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. Every war we fight, we're not just trying to win. We're trying to make sure the next potential enemy thinks twice before starting anything. The simulation shifted to show aftermath reports, diplomatic communications, intelligence assessments from dozens of species. The consistent theme was a kind of bewildered respect mixed with genuine fear. Humans had proven they were willing to accept massive losses to prevent their enemies from achieving any strategic goals. You militarized mercy, Tess said slowly. Your compassion is a weapon. The best weapons usually are. Quinn began shutting down the simulation. Every human soldier learns that protecting innocence isn't just morally right, it's strategically essential. If you let hostage-taking work even once, you guarantee more hostages in the future, so you make it costly enough that no one tries it twice. Tess stood in the fading simulation, her crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the dim emergency lighting as the systems powered down. She thought about her colleagues who'd fled, who'd found human military conditioning too brutal, too psychologically damaging to endure even as observers. How many of your soldiers break under this training? She asked. Define break. Quinn's expression was thoughtful. If you mean wash out during basic training, about 30%. If you mean develop psychological trauma that requires treatment, maybe 60% over the course of a full career. If you mean become non-functional, less than 5%. And you consider this acceptable? I consider it necessary. Quinn met her gaze directly. Every human soldier who breaks during training is one less soldier who breaks during combat when lives depend on them. Every trauma we process in a controlled environment is trauma that won't paralyze us when civilians are screaming for help. Tess thought about the Valerian military, with their elegant crystalline hierarchy and carefully maintained psychological wellness protocols. Their soldiers were healthier, happier, more balanced individuals. They were also completely unable to function in the kind of desperate, chaotic, morally ambiguous situations where human forces excel. Your entire species weaponized PTSD, she said, and somehow it didn't sound like an accusation. We weaponized resilience, Quinn. Trauma is just the price we pay for it. The question is whether that price is worth paying. And your answer? Quinn gestured toward the now dark simulation chamber. where the echoes of human military conditioning still seem to linger in the air like ghosts. My answer is that in the 3 decades since humans joined the galactic community, the number of major interspecies conflicts has dropped by 87%. The number of successful hostage situations is down 94%. The number of worlds lost to aggressive expansion is functionally 0. He paused, his scarred face thoughtful in the dim light. Maybe breaking a few minds is worth preventing a few genocides. Tez stood in the silence that followed, her crystalline matrix processing implications that stretched far beyond military tactics. The humans hadn't just developed a different approach to warfare, they'd developed a different approach to peace, one that relied on being so demonstrably dangerous that no one wanted to test their limits. The other species will never understand, she said finally. They don't need to understand, they just need to remember that human civilians are off. Human territory is non-negotiable, and human warnings should be taken seriously. Quinn began walking toward the exit. Everything else is just implementation details. As they left the simulation chamber, Tez found herself thinking about her colleagues who'd fled the room, unable to process what they'd witnessed. She wondered if their inability to understand human conditioning was actually a feature, not a bug. Maybe the galaxy needed species that couldn't comprehend that level of psychological engineering. Maybe it also needed one species that could. Same time next week, Quinn asked as they reached the corridor. Tess looked back at the chamber where humanity's darkest educational secrets were stored, where the price of galactic peace was measured in broken minds and weaponized empathy. Same time next week, she agreed. After all, someone had to understand the monsters, even if those monsters were the only thing standing between civilization and chaos.